Listen, everybody, there comes a moment in your life when the noise gets too loud, when the expectations from everyone else begin to suffocate the voice inside of you. You try to be everything for everyone. You stretch yourself thin, and somewhere along the way, you lose sight of who you were created to be. You wake up one day and realize that you have been pouring into people, situations, and expectations that were never meant to sustain you. And in that realization, something begins to shift. You start to understand that the breakthrough you have been praying for is not in controlling everything around you, but in reclaiming everything within you, Because when you focus on yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a purposeful way, everything begins to fall into alignment. It's not magic. It's not coincidence. It's clarity. It's the moment you stop chasing validation and start building foundation. It's when you stop asking, who do they need me to be? And start asking, who am I called to become? You've spent so much time adjusting your life to fit into spaces that were never designed for your growth. You bent, you broke, you compromised just to belong. But belonging without becoming will always leave you empty. And that emptiness is not a punishment. It's a signal. It's telling you that you have outgrown the version of yourself that needed approval to feel worthy. There is power in turning inward. There is healing in sitting with yourself long enough to hear your own truth, because the world will always have an opinion, but your purpose will always have a voice. And if you don't learn how to listen to that voice, you'll spend your entire life living someone else's script. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop losing yourself while loving them. It means you recognize that you cannot pour from a place of depletion and expect it to create abundance. You cannot keep giving your energy to things that drain you and expect to feel fulfilled. At some point, you have to choose you, not the broken, insecure version of you, but the evolving, healing, rising version of you. And I know that choice is not easy, because when you start focusing on yourself, some people won't understand. They'll call you distant. They'll call you different. They might even call you selfish. But what they're really reacting to is your growth. They are uncomfortable because you're no longer shrinking to make them comfortable. And that's okay. Growth will always require separation, not because you're better than anyone, but because you're becoming who you were always meant to be. And not everyone is assigned to that journey. You have to learn how to sit in the discomfort of change without running back to the familiarity of dysfunction. Because just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's right. Sometimes familiar is just what you've been conditioned to accept, but you were not created to survive patterns. You were created to break them. When you focus on yourself, you begin to see things differently. You start recognizing patterns you once ignored. You start setting boundaries you once feared. You start choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, purpose over pressure, and slowly, everything that once felt complicated begins to simplify. Because alignment doesn't come from controlling everything around you. It comes from mastering what's within you, your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions, your discipline. These are the things that shape your life, not the opinions of people who are not living it. You have to take responsibility for your own healing. Not because what happened to you was your fault, but because what happens next is your responsibility. You cannot keep blaming your past for a future you're unwilling to change. Healing requires honesty. It requires you to confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. It requires you to stop running from your pain and start learning from it. And yes, it's going to hurt. Growth always does, but pain is not the enemy. Stagnation is. Because pain means something is shifting. Pain means something is shifting. Pain means something is being released. Pain means you are making room for something greater. You don't need to have everything figured out to start focusing on yourself. You just need to be willing to take one step, one decision, one moment of choosing differently, because transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the small, consistent choices you make every single day. It's in the way you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. It's in the boundaries you set even when it's uncomfortable. It's in the discipline you maintain even when motivation fades. These are the moments that define your growth, not the big public victories that everyone sees. When you start focusing on yourself, you'll notice that certain things begin to fall away. Relationships that were built on convenience rather than connection. Habits that were feeding your comfort but starving your purpose. Mindsets that kept you small when you were created for more. And at first, it might feel like you're losing everything. But in reality, you're making space for what actually belongs in your life, because everything that is meant for you will align with who you are becoming, not who you used to be, not who people expect you to be, not who people expect you to be, but who you are growing into. And that version of you requires a different environment, a different mindset, a different level of discipline. You cannot step into a new season with an old mentality. You cannot expect different results while holding on to the same habits. Change requires release. It requires you to let go of what no longer serves you, even if it once did. And I know letting go is hard. Because sometimes we hold on to things not because they're good for us, but because we are afraid of what life will look like without them. But what if what you're holding on to is the very thing holding you back? What if your breakthrough is on the other side of your willingness to release what's familiar? When you focus on yourself, you begin to trust yourself. You begin to trust yourself. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you've learned how to navigate uncertainty without losing yourself. You've learned how to stand in your truth even when it's uncomfortable. You've learned how to choose growth even when it's painful. And that trust changes everything, because once you trust yourself, you stop settling for less than what you deserve. You stop chasing things that are not aligned with your purpose. You stop allowing fear to dictate your decisions, and instead you start moving with intention, with clarity, with confidence. Everything begins to fall into place, not because life becomes perfect, but because you become aligned. Your priorities shift, your perspective changes, your energy becomes more intentional, and that alignment attracts opportunities, relationships, and experiences that are in harmony with who you are becoming. You don't have to force what is meant for you. You don't have to chase what is aligned with your purpose. When you focus on yourself and become who you are called to be, what belongs to you will find you. It will recognize you. It will connect with you in a way that feels natural, not forced. So stop exhausting yourself trying to control everything outside of you. Stop overextending yourself for people who don't appreciate your presence. Stop silencing your voice to keep the peace in spaces that were never peaceful to begin with. Choose yourself. Choose your growth. Choose your healing. Choose your purpose. Because when you do, everything else will begin to align, not because the world changed, but because you did. There is something powerful that happens when you finally stop chasing everything outside of you and start paying attention to what's happening within you. For so long, you may have believed that the answer to your confusion, your delays, your frustration was somewhere out there in another opportunity, another relationship, another level of recognition. But the truth is, alignment has never been about what you can gain externally. It has always been about what you are willing to build internally. And the moment you begin to focus on yourself with intention, everything around you begins to respond differently. Focusing on yourself is not about isolation or neglecting others. It is about recalibration. It is about returning to the center of who you are, so that everything you build from that place is rooted in clarity instead of confusion. Because when you are unclear about who you are, you will say yes to things that were never meant for you. You will entertain distractions that pull you further away from your purpose. You will keep trying to force outcomes that were never aligned with your growth. But when you take the time to understand yourself, your values, your boundaries, your vision, you stop moving randomly and start moving intentionally. You begin to realize that a lot of what you were calling bad luck was actually misalignment. You were in spaces that did not reflect your worth. You were connected to people who could not recognize your value because you had not fully recognized it yourself. You were pursuing goals that looked good on the outside but felt empty on the inside. And instead of questioning the direction, you kept questioning yourself. But focusing on yourself shifts that perspective. It allows you to see that the problem was never your potential. It was your positioning. When you focus on yourself, you start to become more aware of your patterns. You notice how you respond to pressure, how you handle rejection, how you navigate uncertainty. And in that awareness, you gain power, because you cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. But once you see it, once you understand it, you are no longer controlled by it. You begin to break cycles that once felt permanent. You begin to choose differently, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. There is a discipline that comes with self-focus. It requires you to be honest with yourself in ways that are not always comfortable. It requires you to confront the habits that have been holding you back, even when those habits feel familiar. It requires you to take responsibility for your growth instead of waiting for someone else to validate it. And that level of discipline is what creates alignment. Because alignment is not something that just happens. It is something that is cultivated through consistent, intentional choices. As you begin to focus on yourself, your standards start to shift. What you once tolerated, you no longer accept. What once impressed you no longer moves you. What once distracted you no longer moves you. What once distracted you no longer has the same pull. And it's not because you have become discerning. You've learned that not everything deserves your time, your energy, or your attention, and that discernment protects your alignment. You start to understand that your energy is a resource. Where you invest it matters. If you keep pouring into things that do not pour back into you, you will always feel depleted. But when you become intentional about where your energy goes, you create space for things that actually nurture your growth. And that shift alone can change everything, because now, instead of constantly reacting to life, you are actively creating it. Focusing on yourself also strengthens your relationship with your own voice. For a long time, you may have silenced it to accommodate others. You may have ignored your instincts because you were afraid of being wrong or misunderstood. But the more you invest in yourself, the more confident you become in your ability to discern what is right for you. You stop needing constant reassurance from others because you have built trust within yourself, and that trust becomes your foundation. It keeps you grounded when things feel uncertain. It keeps you steady when things don't go as planned. It reminds you that even if everything around you is shifting, you are still anchored in who you are. And that kind of stability is what allows everything else to fall into place. Because you are no longer building your life on external approval. You are building it on internal alignment. When you are aligned, your decisions become clearer. You no longer feel torn between what you want and what others expect. You no longer feel the need to over-explain your choices. You move with a sense of peace that doesn't require validation. And that peace is not passive, it is powerful. It allows you to walk away from what is not right without second-guessing yourself. It allows you to pursue what is right without hesitation. You also begin to notice that opportunities start to look different. You are no longer attracted to things simply because they are available. You are drawn to things that resonate with your purpose. And because you have done the internal work, you are able to recognize alignment when you see it. When are able to say yes with confidence and no without guilt. And that clarity saves you from a lot of unnecessary detours. It is important to understand that focusing on yourself does not eliminate challenges. Life will still present obstacles. You will still face moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments of uncertainty. But the difference is in how you respond. Because now you are not reacting from a place of insecurity. You are responding from a place of awareness. You are not easily shaken because you know who you are. There is also a level of patience that develops when you focus on yourself. You stop rushing the process. You stop comparing your journey to others. You understand that growth takes time and that alignment cannot be forced. And instead of becoming frustrated by the pace, you become committed to the process. You trust that every step you are taking is building something meaningful, even if you cannot see the full picture yet. That patience allows you to remain consistent, and consistency is what creates results. Not occasional bursts of motivation, not temporary discipline, but steady, intentional effort over time. When you focus on yourself, you begin to value consistency over perfection. You understand that it's not about getting everything right. It's about staying committed to becoming better. As you continue on this path, you will notice that your relationships begin to change. Not because you are trying to distance yourself, but because you are no longer operating from the same place. You are no longer seeking validation. So connections that were built on that need begin to fade. At the same time, you begin to attract people who align with your growth, people who respect your boundaries, who support your vision, who recognize your value. And those relationships feel different. They feel lighter, more genuine, more supportive, because they are not built on who you were trying to be. They are built on who you actually are, and that authenticity is what makes them sustainable. But everything begins to fall into place, not in a dramatic overnight transformation, but in a quiet, steady unfolding. Things start to make sense. Decisions feel easier. Your mind feels clearer. Your energy feels more stable. And even when things are not perfect, they feel aligned. You begin to see that focusing on yourself was never about becoming someone else. It was about returning to yourself. It was never about becoming someone else. It was about returning to yourself. It was about stripping away everything that was never truly you and embracing everything that is. And in that process, you create a life that reflects your truth instead of your fears. This is where real fulfillment comes from. Not from external achievements alone, but from the internal alignment that allows you to actually enjoy them. Because without alignment, even success can feel empty. But with alignment, even the smallest victories feel meaningful. You stop measuring your life based on how it looks to others and start measuring it based on how it feels to you. You prioritize peace over pressure, purpose over popularity, growth over comfort. And those priorities guide your decisions in a way that keeps you aligned. The more you focus on yourself, the more you realize that everything you were searching for externally was already within your reach. The confidence, the clarity, the direction, it was all waiting for you to slow down long enough to recognize it. And once you do, you stop chasing and start attracting, because alignment is magnetic. It draws in what is meant for you without force. It creates connections that are genuine. It opens doors that are sustainable. It builds a life that is not just successful, but significant. And all of it begins with a decision to focus on yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of purpose. Not to disconnect from the world, but to engage with it more authentically. Not to escape your responsibilities, but to fulfill them from a place of wholeness. That decision changes everything. Growth will always ask something from you. It is never free, never accidental, and never comfortable. It demands that you release what feels familiar in order to receive what is necessary. And that is where most people struggle, not because they don't want to grow, but because they don't want to let go. Because they don't want to let go. Because letting go feels like loss before it feels like freedom. It feels like emptiness before it feels like expansion. It feels like uncertainty before it feels like alignment. You can't step into a new version of yourself while holding on to everything that belongs to the old one. It doesn't work like that. Growth is not about adding more on top of who you already are. It's about removing what no longer fits who you are becoming. And sometimes what you need to release is not obvious. It's not always loud or clearly harmful. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's disguised as comfort, routine, or even loyalty. You've held on to mindsets that once protected you, but are now limiting you. You've believed things about yourself that were shaped by past experiences, not present truth. You've told yourself that you're not ready, not capable, not deserving, simply because you've never seen yourself in a different light. But growth requires you to challenge those beliefs. It requires you to question the narratives you've been repeating and ask yourself if they are actually true or just familiar. Letting go of limiting beliefs is one of the hardest parts of growth because those beliefs often feel like identity. They've been with you for so long that you don't even realize how much they shape your decisions. They tell you when to play small, when to stay quiet, when to avoid risk. They convince you that safety is more important than purpose, but the truth is what feels safe is often what keeps you stuck. Growth will ask you to let go of the need for validation, and that is a difficult release because validation feels good. It reassures you. It makes you feel seen and accepted, but when you depend on it, you lose your sense of direction. You start making choices based on how they will be perceived instead of whether they are aligned with who you are. You start performing instead of living, and over time, that performance becomes exhausting. When you let go of the need for validation, you reclaim your power. You stop outsourcing your worth to people who are not responsible for defining it. You stop waiting for approval before taking action. You begin to trust your own judgment, even when it goes against what others expect. And that trust allows you to move with confidence, not because everyone agrees with you, but because you are aligned with yourself. There are also relationships that growth will require you to release. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Some people come into your life for a season to teach you something, to support you in a specific phase. But when that phase ends, the connection may no longer serve your growth. and holding on to it out of habit, fear, or obligation can keep you stuck in a version of yourself that you have already outgrown. Letting go of relationships is painful because it involves emotions, memories, and shared experiences. It's not just about the person, it's about what the relationship represented. It's about the comfort, the familiarity, the sense of belonging. But you have to ask yourself if that comfort is costing you your growth. You have to be honest about whether the relationship is helping you become better or keeping you where you are. Growth will also challenge your habits, the routines you spies, feel built the ways you spend your time, the patterns you repeat daily. All of these shape your life more than you realize. And if those habits are not aligned with your goals, they will quietly hold you back. Not in a dramatic way, but in a consistent, subtle way that slows your progress. You can't expect different results while maintaining the same habits. You can't talk about change and still operate the same way. Growth requires discipline. It requires you to do things that are uncomfortable, inconvenient, and sometimes even frustrating. It requires you to show up for yourself even when you don't feel like it. And that means letting go of habits that prioritize comfort over progress. Comfort is one of the biggest obstacles to growth because it convinces you that where you are is good enough. It tells you to stay where it's easy, where it's predictable, where it doesn't challenge you. But growth does not happen in comfort. It happens in the stretch, in the tension, in the moments where you are forced to rise above your current limitations. Letting go of comfort does not mean you have to suffer or struggle constantly. It means you are willing to step outside of what is easy in order to pursue what is meaningful. It means you are willing to take risks, to try new things, to trade uncertainty without running back to what is familiar. And that willingness is what creates opportunity. There is also a version of yourself that you will have to release. The version that doubted you, the version that settled, the version that accepted less than what you deserved. That version may have been necessary at one point. It may have helped you survive certain situations, but it is not the version that will help you thrive in the next chapter of your life. Letting go of that version of yourself can feel like losing a part of your identity, because even though it held you back, it was still a part of you. It was still familiar, but growth requires you to, it was still familiar, but growth requires you to step into a new identity, one that reflects your potential instead of your past. You have to give yourself permission to change, to become someone different, to outgrow the expectations you once had for yourself. Because if you keep trying to fit into who you used to be, you will limit who you can become, and your future deserves more than that. There is a fear that comes with letting go. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of making the wrong decision, and that fear can make you hesitate. It can make you hold on longer than you should. It can make you question whether growth is worth the cost. But what you have to understand is that staying the same also has a cost. There is a cost to not growing, a cost to staying in situations that drain you, a cost to holding on to beliefs that limit you, a cost to repeating patterns that keep you stuck. And over time, that cost becomes heavier than the fear of letting go. When you begin to release what no longer serves you, you create space. Space for new opportunities, new relationships, new perspectives. Space for growth, for healing, for transformation. And that space is necessary because you cannot receive something new if your life is already full of things that do not belong. Letting go is not a one-time event. It is a process. There will be moments where you feel strong and certain, and there will be moments where you feel unsure and tempted to go back. But every time you choose to move forward, every time you choose growth over comfort, you are reinforcing a new pattern. And over time, that pattern becomes your new normal. What once felt difficult becomes natural. What once felt uncomfortable becomes familiar. And you begin to realize that letting go was not about losing, it was about making room for something. Better growth transforms you from the inside out. It changes the way you think, the way you act, the way you see yourself in the world around you. And as you change, your life changes with you, not because everything becomes perfect, but because you are no longer settling for what is not aligned with your growth. You begin to attract different experiences, opportunities that challenge you, that stretch you, that push you to become more, relationships that support your growth instead of hindering it, situations that reflect your new standards instead of your old limitations. And it all starts with your willingness to let go. to release what is comfortable but no longer beneficial, to walk away from what is familiar but no longer aligned, to trust that what you are making space for is greater than what you are leaving behind. Because growth is not just about where you are going, it's about what you are willing to leave behind to get there. Transformation begins the moment you decide to take responsibility for your own life, not in a way that blames you for everything that has happened, but in a way that empowers you to take control of what happens next. Because there is a difference between fault and responsibility. You may not be at fault for the pain you experienced, the environments you were raised in, or the opportunities you were denied, but your healing, your growth, your future, that is your responsibility. And the moment you accept that, everything begins to shift. For a long time, it can feel easier to point outward, to identify what went wrong, who hurt you, what held you back. And those things matter. They are real. They have shaped you in ways that cannot be ignored. But if you stay in that place too long, it becomes a trap. Because as long as your focus is on what happened to you, you limit your ability to decide what happens for you. Healing requires a level of honesty that is not always comfortable. It asks you to sit with yourself and confront the parts of your story that you have been avoiding, not just the things that were done to you, but the ways you have responded, the patterns you have repeated, the choices you have made from a place of pain instead of purpose. And that kind of reflection is not easy. It requires courage. It requires humility. It requires a willingness to see yourself clearly without judgment, but also without denial. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot change what you pretend does not exist. And so the process begins with awareness, with recognizing the ways your past has influenced your present, the fears that have shaped your decisions, the insecurities that have shaped your decisions, the wounds that have affected your relationships. Not to stay stuck in them, but to understand them so you can move beyond them. There is a misconception that healing is something that happens quickly. Something that happens quickly, something that you can complete and move on from. But healing is not linear. It does not follow a straight path. There will be days when you feel strong and grounded, and there will be days when old emotions resurface unexpectedly. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. It means you are human. It means you are doing the work. Taking responsibility for your healing means showing up for yourself consistently, even when it is difficult. It means choosing growth even when it would be easier to stay the same. It means being patient with yourself while also holding yourself accountable, because growth requires both compassion and discipline. There will be moments where you are tempted to fall back into old habits, old ways of thinking, old patterns of behavior, not because they are good for you, but because they are familiar. And in those moments, responsibility means choosing differently. It means pausing before reacting. It means asking yourself if your actions are aligned with the person you are trying to become. It also means taking ownership of your decisions, understanding that every choice you make, no matter how small, is shaping your future. The way you spend your time, the way you speak to yourself, the way you respond to challenges, all of these things matter. They are not random. They are building something, and you have the power to decide what that something will be. Discipline plays a significant role in this process because transformation is not just about what you feel. It is about what you do. It is about the habits you build, the routines you create, the standards you set for yourself. Motivation may come and go, but discipline is what keeps you moving forward when motivation fades. You will not always feel like doing the work. You will not always feel inspired or confident or ready. But if you wait for those feelings, you will remain stuck. Responsibility means showing up anyway. It means doing what needs to be done even when it is inconvenient, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it requires sacrifice. At the same time, healing also requires grace. It requires you to be kind to yourself in the process, to understand that you are learning, that you are growing, that you are evolving. It means not punishing yourself for your mistakes, but learning from them. It means not expecting perfection, but striving for progress. There is a balance between holding yourself accountable and giving yourself grace. Too much accountability without grace can lead to burnout and self-criticism. Too much grace without accountability can lead to stagnation. But when you find the balance, you create an environment where real transformation can happen. Trust is another important element, not just trust in the process, but trust in yourself. Trust it that you are capable of change. Trust that you can handle what comes your way. Trust that you can make decisions that are aligned with your growth, and that trust is built over time through consistent action. Every time you choose to show up for yourself, you strengthen that trust. Every time you follow through on a commitment, you reinforce it. Every time you make a decision that aligns with your values, you build confidence. And over time, that confidence becomes a foundation that supports you in every area of your life. Responsibility also means letting go of excuses, not in a harsh or judgmental way, but in an honest way. Recognizing when you are holding yourself back. Recognizing when you are holding yourself back. Recognizing when fear is disguising itself as logic. Recognizing when fear is disguising itself as logic. Recognizing when you are waiting for the perfect moment instead of creating the right one. There will never be a perfect time to change. Or creating the right one. There will never be a perfect time to change. There will never be a moment where everything aligns perfectly and makes it easy. You have to decide to begin where you are with what you have. And that decision is what sets everything in motion. As you continue to take responsibility for your healing and growth, you will begin to see changes. Not always immediately, but gradually you will notice shifts in your mindset. You will respond differently to situations that once triggered you. You will make choices that reflect your growth instead of your past, and those changes will begin to impact every area of your life. Your relationships will improve because you are showing up as a healthier version of yourself. Your opportunities will expand because you are operating from a place of clarity and confidence. Your sense of peace will increase because you are no longer in conflict with yourself. Transformation is not about becoming someone completely different. It is about becoming more of who you truly are without the layers of fear, doubt, and pain that have been holding you back. It is about stepping into your potential fully and unapologetically, and that process is ongoing. There is no final destination where you have it all figured out. There will always be new levels, new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But the difference is that you are no longer afraid of that. You embrace it. You see it as part of your journey. Because once you understand that your life is shaped by your choices, your actions, your commitment to growth, you stop waiting for change and start creating it. You stop hoping for things to get better and start making them better. Everything you need to transform your life is already within your reach. The strength, the resilience, the ability to grow, it is all there. It just requires you to take responsibility, to do the work, to trust the process, and to keep moving forward even when it is difficult. And as you do that, you will begin to see that transformation is not something that happens to you. It is something that happens because of you. At the end of the day, everything you've been searching for was never meant to be found by chasing the world. It was meant to be discovered by understanding yourself. The moment you shift your focus inward, you begin to unlock a different kind of power, one that isn't dependent on circumstances, opinions, or temporary outcomes. You start to realize that alignment is not something you wait for. It's something you create through your choices, your discipline, and your willingness to grow. When you choose to focus on yourself, you are not turning your back on the world. You are preparing yourself to face it with clarity, strength, and purpose. You are building a foundation that cannot be shaken by rejection, delayed by fear, or broken by temporary setbacks. You are learning how to stand in your truth, how to trust your voice, and how to move with intention instead of confusion. Letting go becomes easier when you understand that what you release is not a loss, but a necessary step toward becoming. Healing becomes meaningful when you accept that your past may have shaped you, but it does not have the authority to define you. Responsibility becomes empowering when you realize that your future is not something that happens by chance, but something that is built through consistent, intentional action. Everything begins to fall into place, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you become aligned. Your mindset shifts, your energy becomes focused, your decisions become clearer, and your path becomes more purposeful. You stop forcing what isn't meant for you and start attracting what is. You stop settling for less and start stepping into more. You stop doubting yourself and start becoming yourself. And in that transformation, you find a peace that isn't temporary, a confidence that isn't temporary, a confidence that isn't fragile, and a purpose that isn't dependent on anyone else's approval. You begin to live a life that reflects who you truly are, not who you were told to be, and that is where true fulfillment exists. So choose yourself, grow yourself, heal yourself, and watch how everything you've been waiting for begins to align with who you are becoming, because the moment you become intentional about your own life is the moment your life begins to change forever.